I'm Issa. I'm an adoptee. I'm an entrepreneur, and I'm the founder of a company called Identity. And we create resources for adoptive and foster families.
Hi, everyone. Hello. Welcome back to Adopted Gals podcast. So before we start the video today, the interview that we have with Isaac, wanted to let you guys know if you are an adoptee, or even if you're a parent, an adoptive parent, and you have a story or you want to share your experience, please let us know. We'd love to have you on our podcast. You can email us at adoptedgals@gmail.com. You can also reach out to us in the comments and we'll try to reach out to you afterwards. And then, quick disclaimer, we talk about a lot of different topics here. Sometimes it might seem like we're anti adoption, and that is not the case. We are pro education and showing all perspectives. So that's why today we're super excited to have Isaac on, because he sheds light on the more positive aspects of adoption.
Mm-hmm. So you guys, this is Isaac. He is another adoptee. He has his own YouTube channel. We'll leave all of his information in the YouTube description box after we finish this video. So he does basically what we do, just shedding light on adoption, transracial adoption, and what that entails. And we are a big fan of his. He says he's a big fan of us too. So it's nice to find other adoptees that are doing what we're doing. And it's just like exciting to like link up and just like talk about our story and just kind of like have a kumbaya moment. You know what I mean? Yeah. So without further ado, Isaac, introduce yourself. Let people know who you are.
Absolutely, yes, and I am a big fan. I'm honored to be here. I love watching you guys chat about your experience, and I think it's unique. Like, people always talk about how there's a lot of women in adoption, but I think there's like not a lot of like conversations like this in adoption. And so I think it's a really kind of unique way because I've never had a problem with there being a lot of women in adoption. I get that we need more male adoptee voices and all that, but I think it's a unique way to kind of have your own lane in that. And so I've always found that really interesting about you guys and your show. But yes, I'm Isaac. I'm an adoptee. I'm an entrepreneur, and I'm the founder of a company called Identity. And we create resources for adoptive and foster families. Our goal is to really help parents understand their children better and ultimately make their children feel seen, heard, and valued. And maybe going into that would be helpful here. We choose those words because a lot of times we know that adoptive families already love their kids. Like, we hear all the time, like, "Oh, but we love you so much. Well, we love you." But most of us did not feel understood. We did not feel seen. We did not feel heard. We certainly felt loved in many ways, probably, right? Felt taken care of, but we never looked at our parents and felt like they really understood us. My goal is to really try to create an experience for adoptees where we don't spend our whole lives feeling that way. And I hope with the work that we do, we kind of bridge that gap of understanding where even if it's uncomfortable for adoptive parents, they can at least understand our unique challenges, our unique pain, and find ways to help us through it in a way that's meaningful to us.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. I mean, that's basically the same thing that we do here, right?
Yeah. No, it is the same thing that we do. And like you said, like, I don't really see a lot of men in this space. And I think part of it is one, like, society just kind of gives space for women to really share their emotion and show times when they're very vulnerable, and not so much for men. And to be in your position, I'm sure you've gone through a lot of like vulnerable times where you had to share who you are to strangers, you know what I mean? And I think like a lot of women, we're so used to doing that naturally that that's why a lot of us like kind of take over this space. So I'm so happy that you've been able to not only start this type of work, but you're very consistent with it. And also, like, you're so articulate with how you express everything, and you simplify it so that everybody can understand. You know what I mean? Like, and so it's very intriguing. And so, so I'm kind of curious, like, let's go back to the beginning of Isaac. Like, who is Isaac? Like, how did Isaac become to be? Like, how did he even get adopted? What happened there?
How did Isaac come to be is a great way to put it, to be honest. And so because I've been thinking a ton about this phase of my life. Like, how did Isaac come to be? Because when I was born, Isaac was not my given name. So my name before I was born was Keyshawn, actually.
You
Um,
sound
yeah. So for the first 2 years of my life,
Yeah.
for the first 2 years of my life, I was Keyshawn.
Mm-hmm.
So how did Isaac come to be feels like a very fitting question. Um, and so, yeah, so for first 2 years of my life was with my birth mother, family, just, struggling through different forms of poverty, typical things, most of the stuff that brings us to this scenario in the first place,
Mm-hmm.
different forms of homelessness, things like that. And so after 2 years, my birth mother brought me to an adoption agency. And within a year, I was placed and adopted. It wasn't like a huge time. I went through several foster homes before I landed in my parents' house, just kind of
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately. But I did not spend a ton of time in foster care.
What
So,
state were you born? Where were you born, and where did you end up getting adopted?
so I was born in New Jersey. I was
Mm-hmm.
adopted out of Richmond, Virginia. So I have
Oh,
no
Okay.
clue how that trek happened, like what the journey from New Jersey to there was. But I was born in New Jersey.
mm.
So yeah. And so that's how I became Isaac. Trying to think if there's any more pressing details there. But yeah, I mean, white family, transracial adoption, not too much, I think, in the first couple of years of life. I mean, I think very similar to most transracial adoptees, like the early years of your life are just kind of almost like a blur and not racial in terms of me at least, not racially significant. It wasn't
Mm-hmm.
really until I got like 5, 6, 7 that like elements of adoption and elements of race started to show up.
Oh, so
Mm-hmm.
you were adopted. So how old were you when you got adopted?
I was 2 when I got adopted.
Oh, so
So
young.
only about 3 or 4 years later did those feelings start to come up. So it wasn't long. But I definitely in like from like 2, 3, 4, 5 don't have too many memories of insecurities, even knowledge or understanding of adoption or the separation even. I
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
have one
Mhm.
memory of my birth mother after I was adopted, but other than that, I don't have much to think about from that time period, whether by like my body just being like no,
Yeah.
or maybe just being young. And
Mm-hmm.
so it didn't really surface, like nothing surfaced for me again until I was around 6. And that's when I found out my birth mother had another child and kept her. And then like
Oh.
the
Mm-hmm.
waves of understanding adoption all came together for me. And
Mm-hmm.
so
So was this younger child like older, like your older sibling or
no, she
younger?
was younger. So
Oh, so you had
she
one
placed me
after.
for adoption and then she had another child.
Okay.
Oh.
And so yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. So when you got adopted by your family, were they living in a diverse area, or was it more like just
Mm.
you're like the only black child in like your school, like how I grew up and
Yeah.
how I also grew up?
Yeah. So when I was first adopted, we actually lived in a more diverse area than where grew up a majority of the time. So Richmond, Virginia, where I was adopted, was much more diverse than where I
Mm-hmm.
ended up growing up. And so
Mm,
my family moved from Richmond to Lancaster, Pennsylvania, where I am now, when I
Oh.
was around 5. And
okay.
so first couple years of my adoption, also because birth family, it was semi-open adoption for a couple years. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then my birth mother moved to Las Vegas with a boyfriend, and then the rest of my birth family migrated out to Texas. And so
Mm,
then we went to Pennsylvania. And so from that point on, it's been not closed, but in terms of meeting in person, closed.
Right, because you
mm.
guys are such, like, so far apart anyways, it's different. So how did that, like, um when you guys when you were younger, like, and you had that quote unquote open adoption, like, were you visiting your birth mother? Because it sounded like your birth dad wasn't really that present, so it was
Yeah,
just a
that was
relationship with the mom. Were you guys like able? Was she able to come over? Like, what was that experience like?
yeah, from everything I know about it, and again, I don't really have too many memories from it, but from
Mhm.
everything I know about it, like there are times that like my parents would pick her up from work. We would spend
Oh,
time with her. Like
Oh wow.
I remember the only memory I have, the last memory I have of my birth mother is us outside of a Chuck E. Cheese with her boyfriend. And
Yeah.
so, like, that's the last memory I have. I oddly went to that Chuck E. Cheese, like, this
That's
year.
kind of a good memory, I guess, I would hope.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
I went to where I think that Chuck E. Cheese was a couple months ago, and it
Yeah.
was interesting. I thought I would feel something, I didn't.
You didn't feel
Yeah.
anything?
I didn't feel
Yeah, you've kind of probably like grown past it a little bit.
yeah, I don't like Chuck E.
You
Cheese anymore.
yeah. Do
Like
you do you still have a relationship with your birth mother, or is it just
yeah, I
completely just
mean,
distant?
somewhat. Oddly
Yeah.
enough, I have a more of a relationship with other members of my birth family, less my birth
Okay.
mother. You
Mm,
know,
Mhm.
I don't know, I feel like and I don't know how other adoptees feel about this, and maybe other adoptees just have different experiences, I know we all do, but I feel like my birth mother and me, like, we just never bridged the gap. Like,
Mm.
we never found a way yet to, like, have a real conversation or have a real thing. And there have been
Yeah.
times I've
mm,
tried, and I could tell there have been times that maybe she's tried, but, there's varying degrees of, like, readiness, and
Mhm.
sometimes I think I'm ready, and then I'm not. And then other
Mhm.
times, I know I'm not ready.
Mhm.
And so just, like, kind of fluctuation, I think, of being an adoptee is so hard because
Mhm.
I want answers.
yeah.
I
Mhm.
know I want answers, but
Yeah.
I'm not always ready for the answers.
So what
Yeah.
makes you think, like, with your relationship with your family, makes you not ready? Because it seems like you're very aware
Yeah.
of that,
Mhm.
like, that's where you're at, because I feel similar too, but I think I'm just now having awareness that, okay, I'm just not ready, right? Before I used to
Yeah.
just make a lot of excuses, but now I'm like, I'm not really ready, For you,
Yeah.
what would you say makes you feel like, especially the fact that, like, you said, like, you have more relationship with other family members, right?
Yeah.
But with her particularly, like, what are some things, or do you not know, like, what makes you feel like you're not ready?
I don't know that it's even just with, like, her that I'm not ready. I mean, I've had other members of my family, of, like, my birth family, it's like, be willing to answer questions about, like, that time period and things,
Mhm.
and there are times that I think that I wanna know all the details,
Mm,
um, but I don't know. I think to know who our birth parents are through and through is, like, a really tough and tall
Mhm.
task, and to be honest, I feel like there just might be things that I don't wanna know, and
Yeah.
and once you know the information, you can't undo it, and
You
yeah.
can't.
so it's just there's times that I'm like, at some point, I know I just need to, like, know all the information, whether it's good or bad or whatever, but there's just so much of it that I'm like, even though I know it's not, like, gonna be, like, world shattering, there's just gonna be
Mhm.
so much that I don't wanna know,
Yeah.
and there's
Mm,
yeah.
Yeah, I totally understand you on that, where sometimes you just don't wanna ask the questions. I struggle with that a lot sometimes, where
mm,
there's certain things, 'cause, my birth family is all the way in Sierra Leone, West Africa. So sometimes, 1, the language barrier, and
Yeah.
2, it's like, if I ask this question and I get a certain answer, like you just said, it's going to open a whole new world.
The world.
Whether it's gonna be like me figuring out how to heal this new information within myself, or
Yes.
it's like shattering something. I'm like, I don't want that. You know what I mean? Like, I kind of want to just
Yeah.
have continue to heal with what I have right now. Like, I don't want to add anything else to
Yes.
that pile of what needs to be healed. So I completely understand
yeah.
where you like, I
Yeah.
just don't want to know. And I think it's okay for us adoptees to be like, my life, it is where it is right now, and I like it. It's fine for me to not know certain things, as long as it's not like holding you back in moving forward with your life. It's
Mhm.
okay to just be like, it's fine.
Yeah, girl. And I honestly, I have the same sentiments as you guys, because I'm just gonna put out my business. But to give you guys more specifics, like, in my life, my birth mom and dad, they never got married. And in
Mhm.
Africa, men can have multiple wives.
Yeah.
And so there's always this, like, not knowing of, like, okay, why weren't my parents together? why did my dad decide to leave my mom, but they still loved each other, and then there was another woman involved, and then
Yeah.
the mom is creating this story and narrative, or she has her own narrative, and then my dad has his own narrative, and I'm like, I love both of them, but they
Yeah.
both have completely different stories. So now if I know the absolute truth, it's like I'll have to like I won't have to hate one or the other, but it's just like I might feel a little salty,
Exactly.
Yeah.
about the experience with my dad. And so I completely understand, like, to a certain degree, like, it, a little bit of ignorance is a little bit of bliss, where it's like, okay, I don't know, so I'm just gonna love both of you guys. I'm just gonna pretend we are all great, and you guys all did good by me when I was younger, and just kind of
Yeah.
start off from a fresh slate.
Yeah.
It's like I want to protect this image that I have in my head. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
And
Because
that
you've
is
already gone through so much pain, anyways.
And it's also like it's their mess. You don't want to get too between
Yeah,
their mess for y'all to
But
yeah,
deal with.
I think that a lot of us, and maybe it's just me, but I think a lot of us also understand that to know our birth parents is also to know something about us. And
Oof.
and
and
yeah, exactly, yeah.
what does that mean? Like I've always thought about that. Like because my
Yeah.
birth dad, I've known nothing about him my whole life. Like
Mhm.
the only information we got was that when he heard that she was pregnant, that he flee to the Dominican Republic. He just went
Oh
back.
no.
And so
Are you part is he Dominican? Or are you part
yeah,
Dominican?
so I'm half Dominican, and so half
Okay,
Yeah.
black, half Dominican.
okay.
And I think there's like a part of that story where it's like kind of easy to be like done and resolved. But then
Yeah.
there's like another part of it to where like, what if that isn't the full story? Like, what if that isn't even the real information? Like, what goes on?
Exactly.
And what if it's like better or worse?
Mhm.
But then also, like again, to know our birth parents is to know a part of us, and we can't help but be a part of our birth parents either. And
Mhm.
so there's there's a degree of it to where I feel like I do want to know at some point, but I almost wish that I could just find out on my own time. I wish that it didn't have to be like I almost wish it was all written down and I could just
Mhm.
read it chapter by chapter as I felt like reading it
Mhm.
So
versus like we can't just like we are going to have real conversations and sit with them and understand them, and that to
yeah.
me I feels a lot harder than just like getting to read the information, digest it, and then maybe move into it.
Yeah. So
So
you've never spoken to your birth father ever? Or you
no, I don't even know. I don't even
wow.
know
He doesn't
how to
know.
find
Yeah.
him. I've done the DNA stuff, and so I've
Uh-huh.
tried to like make connection, and I've found like I think a third cousin on his side, but the
Okay.
name that we have for him, she had no clue who that was.
Wow.
And so,
Oh.
yeah, yeah, I'm
Mhm.
sure there's more work that I can do to find him, and I may do it, but
Mhm.
it's interesting to not have any information on that side.
Yeah. So
Hmm.
now let's repivot the question a little more or a little more towards like your adoptive family, like the
Yeah.
dynamic. Before we started the video, I was talking to Isaac because I was watching some of his episodes on his YouTube channel, and his adoptive family is involved in some of those episodes, especially his sister. And I was just talking about how that is so amazing to see for him and his family to sit and have these hard conversations about being a transracial adoptee and what he goes through, what his sister goes through. And it's so beautiful to see that because a lot of adoptees, they don't have a really good relationship with their adoptive parents.
No, not at all.
And it's good to see that because that's what we do is to try and educate better so you don't go through life and no longer talking to your adoptive parents because there's misunderstanding on that. So can you tell us a little bit about that dynamic with your adoptive family, your siblings, and how that was growing up?
Yeah, I think growing up it was very different than it is now. I mean, growing up, I think we all had we all had similar experiences growing up.
Hmm.
These weren't conversations that were happening like when I was growing
Hmm.
up, especially when it came to the racial aspect of my
Yeah.
life. It was mostly ignored and mostly kind of almost just like an icebreaker.
Yeah.
If you know what I'm saying. It's something that was kind of like something that had to be made sense of.
Yeah.
And so not really growing up, and I think my siblings same way. My siblings had only really even understood anything. Me and my sister just did a talk at a conference, and she was like, "Yeah, I just didn't even understand until I was an adult that you were even having like the reason that you were having behavioral issues was connected to adoption. Like that wouldn't have
Mhm.
been my guess. And
Mhm.
so like growing up, adoption was talked about a little bit more, like adoption pain was talked about a little bit more, but the
Mhm.
racial aspect of it was not. And a lot of my, challenges, whether it been attachment or behavioral, were not were not linked very well to adoption.
Mm,
Mhm.
They were
Mm.
linked mainly to like ADHD type issues and
yeah.
other things. And so there was recognition that I had pain from adoption because I started having that pain very early. I was like 6, 7,
Mhm.
really struggling with adoption. Um,
Mhm.
I think that there was still a lot of not connecting all the dots growing up.
Mhm.
And
What do you think, like, when it comes to pain? Because from what I understand, just seeing how you talk about your family and just talk about adoption process overall, it sounds like you've been able to find a lot of healing. And to be honest, from the outside, one that person that doesn't know much about adoption could be like, well, it sounds like your adoption was easy, right?
Mhm.
Like, what if you feel comfortable telling us, like, what were some of the challenging parts that you were struggling with when you were, because you said when you were 5, 6 or whatever, that's very young to start having that
Absolutely.
awareness of challenges that you're having. Like, what were some of
Mhm.
those challenges when you were younger, and how did those challenges progress as you got older?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the pain of relinquishment is a standard adoptee trait, right? It's locked in.
Mhm.
And so, I mean, I felt that from the time I was 6 with the recognition that my birth mother had had another kid and she kept her, right? So I think like that was able to like connect the dots for me that like it was me that was placed for adoption, right?
Mhm.
So the story of this adoption being this like loving thing or this chosen thing, the
Yeah.
beautiful aspects of it in terms of the ideology that had been told to me really dissipated for me then.
Mm,
So that was really hard for me. And I think it started a lot of the rejection and abandonment feelings, which had
Mhm.
followed me like the whole time. I think one thing for me that has always been difficult is this idea of lovability. And so always feeling unlovable. And
Mhm.
so kind of spending my whole life trying to earn it
mm,
or run away from it, right? Because these both can be kind of
Mhm.
fun. And so finding, either things to dive into that made me feel like I was worth something
Mhm.
or running away from connection and attachment entirely to avoid the pain.
mm,
Yeah.
So,
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
those all
that's
played out.
something,
They all
yeah,
played out.
that's something as an adoptee that you just will struggle with throughout your life. That
Absolutely.
Mm,
trying to be worthy, trying to find yourself in different ways, and it's something I know how and I struggle with. So we definitely
Yeah,
understand that. It's
absolutely. It's
yeah.
real. It's real for so many of us. And so, I mean, I think there are so many parts about adoption that these ideas of unlovability actually get kind of ingrained into us.
Mm.
And I think they're very subtle. And I think it's really hard if you don't spend a lot of time in the adoption space to understand it. And there
Mhm.
definitely work for people that are doing it, but um, even the idea of being chosen, right? The idea of being chosen to be adopted, it starts the cycle of those feelings, to be honest, because you had to be chosen, right? And
yeah.
being chosen, when we think about it in other aspects, right? It does almost have a competitive edge to it, right? When we choose our partners, it's because we're saying no to other partnerships, right? We don't just, none of us just date whoever walks up to us, right?
Mhm.
It's like there's an element of that. And so from an early age, a lot of adoptees, including myself, start to understand that there's like almost market value in us, if that makes sense. And that's a rising and lowering thing. And so there's that element of it. And then there's the public perception, right? These ideas of you're you're loved. And adoption, especially for probably us growing up, was spoken to us that way. Such a
Mhm.
wonderful thing our parents did, such a loving thing. Your parents will love you so much. Uh,
Yeah.
but our concept of love is being shaped through loss. And so they're intertwined. And so we
Mhm.
actually, and I see this play out for so many other adoptees, our actual understanding of love is so intertwined with loss that we actually can't understand it without it, right?
Mhm.
We can't even
Yeah.
understand that.
Yeah, one of our people, one of the other adoptees that we interviewed, she had made this statement and said, adoption is born out of like trauma. And
Right.
I know a lot
Absolutely.
of people always talk about, like you were saying, it's a beautiful thing. Look at this, oh my gosh, you got a new family. They love you so much. And it's like, you should be grateful. You should be so happy. But it's
Yeah.
like, there is so much more pain to it and trauma than the happiness that they want you to feel, people think you should feel. And it's like, that's not what it is. And I think in the beginning, if people were able to focus on that aspect more when it comes to adoption, I think it would help adoptees in a way
Hmm.
more when it comes to finding yourself
Yeah.
and that idea of feeling like you have to continuously find love or something like that where you feel like you're never good enough. And I just feel like that's something we need to shift our mindsets a little bit on, that it's more traumatic than this beautiful, lovely thing.
Yeah, and I mean, we talk about grief and loss a lot,
Yeah.
and because of that, and it's because like you're saying, it's trauma and loss and grief. How they show up in other ways, like death, is very
Mhm,
similar to how they show up in adoption. We just don't frame it
mhm,
that way. And
mhm,
so it is. You're right. It is a perspective shift, and parents actually do tend to understand it when it's shaped differently. That's the
mhm,
creative and I think hard thing about adoption is that so much of its history has been shaped around positivity and around not
mhm.
telling the full truth. It's not lying,
Yes.
it's not
Oh,
telling the
yep.
full truth.
Mhm.
And so parents, when they get in rooms where their child can be explained to them in ways that make sense, it's almost like a light bulb moment. And
Mhm,
for me, grief has been one of those big connectors. I mean, not that I experienced my own grief and loss, so I can speak from my own personal experience, but when I relay the adoption to death and I make those grief cycle comparisons, parents
mhm,
really get that. They can
mhm,
understand
mhm,
how different events in their child's life may make them almost sadder, how
mhm,
significant moments in their life may actually even make them sadder because
mhm,
they're understanding that there's a whole part of them that's not here or two parts of them that aren't here.
mhm,
And that's real for a lot of us. A lot of us grow up having cycles of grief and not even understanding it because we
mhm,
don't realize that's what it is.
Mm.
mhm,
And then we get into adulthood and we're trying to like navigate understanding why we're almost walking in cycles.
mhm. Yeah, it's perfectly well said. One thing that I want to ask though, I
Yeah.
keep taking it back to your adoptive family.
No, you're fine. We can go wherever you want to go.
How have you guys been able to like shift that, conversation and then having them actually hear you? Because a lot of adoptees, they struggle with that with their parents when they come to them and they're just open and they talk about the pain and the things that they felt growing up and being adopted. And a lot of adoptees take it like, oh, you're so ungrateful. How dare you talk to us like that? If you don't have anything nice to say about the adoption, then you're a bad child. And I
Right.
just love how you and your family, you're making this new thing together and they're there supporting you. How were you able to like get them to kind of see you in a way? If
Mhm.
if
Yeah.
if that's making sense?
No, that's a great question. And I like how you said that that almost we get in trouble for talking about our feelings.
Yeah.
Another way that love is shaped and modeled for us,
Oh
right?
my God, yeah.
uh, and so yes, I will say that it wasn't easy at first.
Mhm,
Definitely some of the same reactions that other adoptees get at first.
mhm.
Me, I'm a dramatic guy, so I just do whatever. And so when my parents couldn't understand, I just packed up my minivan and I moved to Georgia. And I think that and I think that it was just I think it was just shocking for my parents. I think that because my family is kind of a closer family in general, kind of
Mhm,
unusually close, that
mhm,
it was just really hard for them and they couldn't understand why I was feeling the way I was feeling. And I was experiencing so
mhm.
much racism at college and I was having so many
Right.
people say things to me. And I was in the throes of so much myself that for them to not understand me, for them to almost act like me talking about having these feelings or not feeling like I got to grow up in communities that
Mhm,
look like me or that my race had always been ignored, to have them kind of dismiss that was just too much for me to handle on top of
mhm,
everybody else saying that too.
mhm.
Mm.
And so moving to Georgia, I kind of got to restart my life for a little bit. And then while I was doing that, while I was kind of on my own journey, my parents were reading books, finding people to talk to, finding online blogs, really taking the time to understand at least the racial component of what I was going through. And that was when I came back home, that them kind of going through that work and apologizing and us being able to have this more open dialogue, I think that started the ability and was probably the first time that I ever felt seen. Right? It was probably the first time that we actually got to start to attach, right? And so really the beginning of, I think, my journey attached to my family, I was 19 years old. So that's pretty late in the game. And so that started the journey. And then I think, as I started to get into the adoption thing a little bit more, as I started to speak more and my thing started to pick up, I think some of the more adoption conversations came out. Where we got more deeper into adoption, and they read more stuff about adoption. I read more stuff about adoption, right? Because a lot of the adult adoptee journey is understanding ourselves and understanding the things that happened to us that we can't really formulate well. And so I was reading books trying to understand adoption, trying to understand who I was, which kind of let the information flow down. And I think it was really just openness. It was openness and commitment to keep changing and learning on their part, which is not an easy feat for many of our parents. But it did allow me to know that it could happen. You know what I mean? A lot of the work that I feel like I came to do and continue to do is because I understand that the mind shifts can happen. And it's about figuring out kind of like the pieces that make it happen. For my family, like it was me leaving and mom blogs and conversations and kind of like a mix of a bunch of things that I think were a little bit probably heavy for everybody. But what I found, I think, from our story and from working in the field is that the earlier people can understand these things, the better, right? Because when I'm an 18-year-old coming to my parents and trying to talk to them about, like, why didn't I grow up around any Black people? Or like, why did we never talk about this or that? It's not too late, right? Because it worked out. But it's so far past the point of there being any redirection, right? I can go back in time and grow around and have Black mentors. And my parents can't go back and try to give me the language and support that I needed. There's a lot of adoptees that are just getting adopted that are young that can have a better experience. And I think it's parents, one, seeing other adoptive parents have the experience, but then also having it explained to them in a way that they understand and can process and relate to. Many adoptive parents do not relate to their adoptees.
Oh my God.
They relate to all their other kids. They relate to all their other kids.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
So they need to find that.
Yeah. And also like the willingness to actually want to do it.
Oh, yeah.
And because I think a lot of adopted parents, they don't want to, some of them get stuck on trying to understand their kid because they feel like they're going to feel shame because of the things that they did wrong. Raising their child. And sometimes when it comes to your adopted child, if you're an adopted parent watching this, when it comes to your adopted child coming to you and talking to you, they're open and they're willing to listen to you as well and to understand you, and that they're going to forgive your mistakes if you are sitting and you're acknowledging your mistakes and apologizing and saying, wow, I did not know that and I am sorry. But a lot of adopted parents can't. It's so hard to find adoptees. You're like one of the few that we found that actually have a better outcome in adulthood with their adoptive parents. Most of them, it's like it's either they don't speak to their adoptive parents or they just have them like at a distance. And I hope, I really just, our goal and our dream for people, adoptees like us who are making these channels, like it creates more awareness where parents can sit back and be like, okay, there's something going on and we actually do need to sit back and actually listen, It's just willingness to just listen.
When you were speaking, like there was a few things that kind of like gave me like a light bulb and and one of them that you said is like you got so fed up with not being understood that you decided to move to a completely different state.
Yeah.
And that's something I've seen a lot of consistency with in other adoptees is that generally, in order for an adoptee to really be taken seriously and their story and their challenges for people to sit down and want to listen, they have to create like there has to be like a catastrophic like event that they create,
Yeah.
right? I know that's happened with Fatmata and her family multiple times. That's happened to me as well, right? Where it's like either you have to like burn down the house damn near, or you
Yeah.
have to decide to move to a different state,
Yeah.
or just something really crazy for them to be like, oh, wait a minute, maybe we should really take look into this a little bit more seriously. And another thing that kind of popped out is that you said is, you know, after that catastrophic event happened, well, not catastrophic, but when you did move, and you started to really reclaim your own identity and find your own community outside of your family, then that's when they decided to just go out and start reading and finding different resources and listening to probably podcasts and videos. And um, that's why podcasts like ours and yours exist, is so that we can give you, the parents, that information um before there is, I guess, a divide between you and your adoptive child. That's why we're putting out this information, so that before you even adopt, you can have these type of resources, so that you don't have to get to a point where your child has to go to a completely different state,
Yeah.
for you to start listening to them. It doesn't have to be that difficult. You know what I mean? The earlier you start to have this understanding of like the plight of adoptees, I think the less you'll, as an adoptive parent, I would think that you would personalize the times when your child does come to you and criticize how you're parenting, right? Because at this point, you already know, okay, this is something normal that the adoptees deal with. It's not a me thing, it's a them and our experience thing. You know what I mean? Like even
Absolutely.
Mata, like some of the stories she tells me about the conversations she tries to have with her parents, a very simple, basic conversation that no one should really take personal, right? But because they didn't do probably as much like education as they should have before adopting, then they're going to personalize it because it's just them in their bubble, and that bubble is being burst. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah, adoptive parents have a lot of bubbles. I mean, they were sold an idea, you know what I mean? It's really hard, I think, for a lot of adoptive parents when that idea doesn't come to fruition, and most of the time it doesn't. I think that's one of the interesting things that doesn't get talked about a lot, is that even if it doesn't go to the degree of like separating from adoptive family or any of those things, most adoptees struggle tremendously, like just statistically. And so most adoptees have mental health issues, to varying degrees, right? Sometimes it's, anxiety and depression. Sometimes it's can be more. And so most adoptees are actually struggling. Most adoptees exhibit behavioral issues in elementary and high school. And so most of the time the bubble is burst. The thing that doesn't happen is the correlation to adoption. And
Yes.
so yes, exactly. It's the bubble doesn't, because it doesn't have the correlation to adoption, or it does in a small way. It does in a way to where it's like, that's why they misbehave. It's going to be okay. This is going to be their phase. Because it doesn't have a deeper connection to adoption, and there's not the kind of intent to think about loss and grief and think about it in this more meaningful way. Um, Many times adoptees themselves get convinced into thinking that that is also true, that it
That
is
is, oh
not
my gosh,
connected to their adoption, that it is not related to their loss. And so
that is
many
so true.
adoptees have to have an awakening at some point in their life that can be really uncomfortable and actually almost world shattering to have.
Yeah. And I think part of the reason why adoptive parents don't make that connection, it goes back again to the idea, well, we gave you an amazing life. You know what
Yes.
I mean? Everything should be so great. And there's no way it could be adoption because we took her out of that crazy, that hell some of them like to use, and this is heaven. So why would she think like that? That can't be it. She's just, a bad child, which for me, that happened to me a lot. And I didn't realize I had terrible anxiety and depression growing up, and my parents didn't necessarily see that. And of course, he came from being adopted, living in a world where no one looked like me.
Yeah.
And I thought I was just a bad child. And a lot of times, adoptive parents, whether it's intentional or not, kind of feed this idea to their adoptive children that you're just a bad child. You're just ungrateful. You're just a bad child. And it's like, I'm having these issues because of my earth shattering world that I live in. And I'm trying to navigate this life and who I am, where do I belong and where do I fit? And because a lot of them don't, again, they are sold this idea of, oh, sunshine and rainbows is such a great thing. They're gonna come in, they're gonna hug you, they're gonna love on you.
Yeah.
Everything should just be perfect. And then
Mm.
it's hard for them to let go of that.
Absolutely.
So
100%.
hard.
Yes, there is actually this there's this third thing that I really want to start talking about more, and I'm slowly kind of adding it to more and more of my stuff. But I think it's loss. I think adoptees struggle with loss, grief, and guilt. I think those
Oh,
are the three most prominent emotions that we experience, especially in childhood. And
mhm,
I think guilt is shaped in us by our instinctual understanding that we have lost something, but the
mhm,
inability to communicate it in a way that we feel like will not hurt our parents.
mhm,
So
mhm,
I think many times we as children and as young adults, and we realize that we have a blank spot in our history. We realize we have this mysterious figure that was a part of our lives, our mother, maybe both of our birth parents. And
mhm,
whether we ever vocalize it or not, we are curious. But our
mhm,
curiosity, because of these narratives, because this is such a good life that we've gotten, because we've always been told about how amazing it is, and maybe our adoption story has always been told as this
mhm,
big beautiful thing at every family gathering, right? We actually learn to feel guilty because we have that curiosity. And so
yeah,
now I'm sitting at the table listening to the story about how my beautiful adoption, but I'm actually really wondering what my birth mother is doing right now. Like I
mhm,
actually really curious about how she is and what she's doing and maybe why she chose to play with me. If I'm so special at this dinner, why in the world did
mhm.
she have to meet me?
Oh my
But
gosh.
I can't say that because then I'm gonna ruin everything here. So
Yeah.
I'm kind of under this layer of guilt my whole life also. Even if
Yeah.
my desire to understand these things is innocent, even if it's not shaped in wanting to go back, it's just
Mhm.
shaped in wanting to understand. And that's why I think it's like and not to, take this conversation in a whole different direction because your show, but it's
No, no,
just like
no. This
I
is
think those are our things. Like to
yeah.
me, every adoptee I come across that sits with me honestly, I see loss, I see grief, and I see guilt. I
Yeah.
see I see them in one shape or another.
Mhm.
And I'll stop lecturing in just a second. But I went to the BIPOC Adoptees Conference in July, which you guys should
Mhm.
definitely come this year. And
Yeah.
it's a conference held by adoptees. It's all adoptees of color.
Is that
Most
the
of
one
them,
was that in Washington
it was in Portland. So
or
yeah, it was
Portland?
in
Yeah,
Portland.
Oregon, yeah.
Um,
Mhm.
and incredible space. There was I think over 200 adoptees there from all around the world. Like people flew
Wow.
into other countries to come to this, but they were all over the U.S. Um,
Mhm.
and I led this men's support group at the conference. So there
Mhm.
was I think there was 19, 20 men in this room, all talking about our feelings around adoption. Which
Mm.
just think about that, just in your head.
Mhm.
Think about 20 men in a room talking about this wound that they have.
Mhm.
Um,
Yes,
and
yeah.
and beyond, without a doubt, everybody in that room, loss, grief, guilt.
Mhm.
In some shape or form, it was a defining part of our experience. There was so much
Mhm.
love for our adoptive parents in the room. There was
Mhm.
so much desire to understand ourselves, so much desire to be able to vocalize these things in a way that felt masculine, um,
Mhm.
and and overwhelmingly, I
Mhm.
just felt like every guy that shared a sentiment of one of those three, if not all three of them. And
Mhm.
that to me was so hard and heartbreaking because I also feel all three of those things.
Mhm.
I get to share it differently now that my parents are open, but I still remember all those feelings so deeply and still have some of them.
Mhm.
But it to me, it's so defining of our experience, that
Mhm.
it does kind of hurt me in a lot of ways when I come across it, and I
Yeah.
watch people deal with it.
And you know what? You have guilt on two sides. The one side, what you're speaking on, which is when you're with your adoptive parents and you're just kind of curious about what your life would be like with,
Yeah.
you know, if you had stayed with your biological parents, then it's almost like you're being, you're not being loyal to the people that are taking care of you.
Yeah.
You know, because I experience even sometimes when at first when I would talk about my biological mom to my adopted mom, and I would there's a small little voice that would feel kind of nervous to
Yeah.
even call
Mhm.
my biological mom, you know, and be
Mhm.
like, "Oh yeah, I was just talking to my mom," you know, and I would be like, "Oh, maybe I shouldn't say that. Maybe my mom might feel offended or whatever," right? And
Right.
obviously she doesn't, but there was still that voice in the back of
Yeah.
my head. And
Right.
also you have the guilt from the other side where it's like you have a better life because, you know, you were adopted to a certain degree and
Mhm.
you know, you have maybe siblings or even your birth parents that are still living that life of poverty or um,
Mhm.
you know,
Guilt.
lack of. So there's guilt from like kind of both angles,
Yeah.
you
You
know.
Yeah.
survived. You made it. Survivor's
Yeah.
guilt.
For me, my guilt was
Yeah.
I felt like I couldn't love both parents at the same time.
Mhm.
I felt like
Yeah.
if I did love both parents at the same time, then I'm being ungrateful to my adoptive
Mm.
parents. And the nice thing, the beautiful thing that my mom, she recognized that I was struggling with that. The beautiful thing that she said, she sat me down. She's like, it's okay to love both.
Mm.
And I appreciated that so much, where it kind of opened this like whole world of finding this new appreciation and getting to know who my birth family, who they are and how they are and who I am through them.
Yeah.
So to give me that permission to be like, it's okay, don't feel guilty, was so like,
Huge.
it was amazing. It was so amazing. And of course there's other guilt that still exists, even though I don't have a relationship with my birth family and my adopted family anymore. There's
Yeah.
still that little thing of guilt in the back of my head that tells me when I'm talking about adoption like this, like,
Yeah.
don't speak bad about your parents. That's bad. Like, why are you doing that? And I feel guilty because in the back of my mind for so long it was just be grateful, just be happy. That's it. If you're not that, then what are you doing? That's wrong. You know, that little voice of guilt of
It,
talking about people who gave me such a good life, but it's like I have to talk about my feelings. I have to figure this out, you know? Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, I wrote this thing I just updated my transracial adoption guidebook for parents, and I wrote a dedication in it. And I dedicated it to adoptees. But I wrote this line in it that I just really love. And let me just find it real quick. Um, yeah, I hope that open up. Oh God. I hope that open conversations about adoption and loss become the norm for adoptees and their parents, and that we don't have to hide our pain under guilt. Instead, are
Mm.
welcomed and loved through our grief.
Oh,
And that line
nice.
to me, I feel like it just flew out of me
So
because
powerful.
that's what it is. We just want to be welcomed and loved through it. We don't
Exactly,
need
as
you
we
to
are.
fit
Yeah.
it. We don't need you to try to ignore
Yeah.
it. But
Yeah.
what if we were just loved through it?
Mhm.
And that could be a part of the parenting experience for adoptees,
Mhm.
not something that we're running away from or we're scared of or we
Yeah.
avoid. Um, yeah, I mean, because
I
that's how
would
we would love. Like, I don't know if you guys are married or dating, but like that's how we would love our partner, right? Like, if our
yeah.
partner lost somebody, we wouldn't be like, "All right, done talking about it for the
Right.
next 18 years. Don't mention
Yeah.
it. It's
Yeah.
fine." Right?
Yeah,
We
just
would
let it
be
go. Don't
we
talk
would
about
be
it.
right? We would be there on the nights that it
Yeah.
was hard and the days that it was
Mhm.
easy. And so like
Yeah.
we need the same thing.
That would be such a beautiful thing. I think it would change the game and how adoptees feel, and we wouldn't have to have podcasts like this, you know?
It
They
wouldn't
wouldn't have
change
need
our
to
lives.
exist because if
Yeah.
you're just being loved through everything that you're going through and they're just
Oh, yeah.
understanding and not just, okay, I'll listen to your opinion a little bit, but then it's like, okay, well, you need to get over it. because that's what I experienced a lot with my parents, and that's why we don't have a relationship anymore. It was more like, okay, get over it. And it's like with being adopted, you're gonna go through different phases of experiencing different feelings. So
Yeah.
you could have dealt with this feeling, that whatever it is that you're going through, you would have dealt with it, and you're
Mm,
fine. And then as you get older, there's a new layer to unpack
yeah.
and to deal with, and so on and so forth. It's like your whole life. It's your
Absolutely.
whole life you're dealing
It's a
with it.
lifelong journey. It's a
Yeah.
lifelong journey, and it's supposed to be.
Yes.
But we're
Yeah.
not supposed to have the first 18 years be so hard, I don't think.
Yeah. I don't think so. Not so traumatic. Not so
I don't think
traumatic.
it's supposed to be that hard those first couple of years.
Yeah, it's definitely not a good idea to adopt your kid and put them in a completely like white
Yeah,
area where there's nobody who looks
exactly.
like them. Not a good idea. Not a good
Easier
idea.
for us. I think it can be. And
Yeah.
I hope that we're all doing that together. Like
Yeah.
this show, what we're doing Identity. Like I hope
Yeah.
that we're changing. Like I think about that all the time. It's like such a startup way of putting it, but like changing the experience that adoptees have. Like I think about that every day. It's like this is
Yeah.
an experience for us. Like childhood is an experience, and many people have great childhood experiences. And why can't adoptees have the same thing? Why couldn't the adoptee experience be changed? And it can only be changed by parents recognizing these things.
Exactly.
I wanted to, because I know we're going to be wrapping it up soon, but I wanted
more hours.
What was that?
So you guys don't have 2 more hours.
We can talk all day, trust me.
You know
We can
what?
talk all day.
Actually, we got 5 hours. Come on, let's go.
Exactly.
No, I know that people are gonna want to know, because one of the reasons that we were really excited to have you here is because we saw the positive relationship you do currently have with your adoptive parents. And I know a lot of adoptive parents, like they don't want to be the percentage where the kids don't even want to associate with them, right? So for you, like, what do you think were some of the factors that made it like possible for you guys to have such a strong relationship, like as adults, to the point where you're even having your sister on? Like, I'm sure you and your parents still talk on a consistent basis. Like, how did it get from a point where you had to move all the way to Georgia to, okay, now we're like, we're close again?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's recognition. It was recognition of their own mistakes. I mean, adoptive parents, I think, have to, if they've made these mistakes, which we all make mistakes, they have to recognize them and apologize for them, and let the child know that they also feel pain that they didn't get to experience that. Right. And my parents did a really good job at that. And they continue to do a really good job of it. Because it's such a lifelong journey that it didn't, just because one part of it got settled doesn't mean that there wasn't other pain that still had to be worked through and doesn't still have to be worked through. And so with the racial side of it, and like the way that I grew up and not really knowing any other Black people, there was a lot of recognition of that, a lot of recognition of what I wasn't prepared for. I experienced so much racism at college. It was really hard for me. And there was a lot, once they recognized that I was having that experience and verbally said that and verbally apologized for dismissing it, it allowed the doorway to connection to really start to reopen. And of course, there was continued learning to do, right? There was continued conversations, and there was more to understand than you could unpack in a blog in a year of reading. But I think it was the continuation of it also, right? It's the initial like recognition and apologies and making it clear that they don't feel like that was how they should have done things. But then also continuing to learn, continuing to have conversations, continuing to ask questions. And that, that also allowed me to bring other things to the table, right? Like especially after becoming a teenager, I didn't even bring up my adoption that much to my parents. And so, as an adult, I've been able to bring up other layers of my own grief to my adoptive parents now in a way that I probably wouldn't have felt safe to do if we hadn't have gone through it. There was a time, I don't know, maybe it was like maybe like 2-ish years ago that I was really struggling with my own adoption. You know what I mean? I was really struggling again. And it was around the time that my son was the age that I was placed for adoption. And so now I'm putting that together. But I remember that I was really struggling with this, this idea that she left me. Like, I was like, almost like this kind of voice in my head was like, I actually just can't believe that she left me there. Like, I can't believe that I was left at this agency. And like, I was able to talk about that with my mom. You know what I mean? and I was apologetic. I was still guilty. I was like, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I'm saying this. And she's like, no, you don't have to be sorry. You don't have to be sorry. It's like kind of, I was already there. But like, you can only get to that point, I think, with your child if there's like a lot of recognition, like a lot of, I know that you have struggled. I know that I've done things wrong. I know that I haven't been perfect, but I want to understand more. I want to listen. I want to be in these moments with you. And I think if adoptees see the genuineness of it, they respond to it because they also, like, we also desire that connection.
How did you guys feel safe enough to, like, how did the conversations even start? Did you guys have therapists or like a mediator, or like how did you guys even start having these conversations? Like,
yeah, I guess that's a good question. I mean, I think
was it the packing up and moving?
Yeah, it's like moving really triggered the whole thing.
So like, we need to talk.
Well, moving back, I think also, like, almost kind of like moving back was awkward. You know what I mean? If I was moving back to the area, it was like awkward if we didn't talk about it a little bit more.
Yeah.
That's definitely true.
And so,
well, because the reason I asked that is because, like, I know, like, my sister, for example, like, she was like, I just, like, how would we even have had, like, started those conversations? You know what I mean? And it's like, it's simple. Yeah. Well, it sounds, the actual answer is simple. Like, you just sit down and talk. But it's like, how does, do you put your thoughts on paper? Do you just, or is it just kind of like organic, let everything flow? Because, you don't want to hurt people's feelings. So,
this is a good question, and it also gave me kind of an interesting idea. But yes, I think there could be a interesting guide for, like, talking with adoptive parents.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things that it would start with, just like from just kind of off the top of my head thinking about this, is that it would probably be really helpful for an adoptive parent to have some kind of reference before a conversation. So, like, I've heard of adoptees giving, like, my transracial guide to their parents and then asking to talk about it, right?
Exactly.
I've really found that to be a beautiful, like not even a way that I planned for it to be used, but a really beautiful way that it's been used. Because it gives all this kind of language that an adoptee probably will say, but typically when we first share our emotions, it's our worst way of sharing our emotions. That makes sense.
Oh my
Even
gosh.
if you're saying all the right things, right? It's like when you tell your crush you like them for the first time, and it's like, oh, I just think I have a crush on you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
When we tell it to our adoptive parents, we kind of like mumble through it, or we're just like angry and it like word vomits out. And so it's like, it's all this stuff, and it's all true. None of it's wrong. We're not lying. We're not saying anything wrong. But typically it comes out in a way that turns it into a combat zone rather than a conversation, because all the parents hear is that I did everything wrong, and all the adoptee is feeling is like, I just want to feel heard for the first time. Like, I just want to feel like I have control for the first time.
Yeah.
And so I think it can be really helpful for adoptees that want to engage in this conversation to find a resource, a resource that's easy also. Parents don't read 200, 300-page books, at least not usually. So
I think the videos are, like what you said, like, videos are good because, my adoptive mom, I actually didn't tell her about the podcast because I wanted to, like, in a way, I just wanted this space to be a place I can come to and just be really honest and not feel like I had to feel guilty for my thoughts or my feelings. Because I didn't think that would help anybody, right? To disguise, to only be half truthful. And so she found out about the podcast actually because Fatmata had, like, posted it on Facebook or something. And so she was like, oh, that's my daughter. Like, let me listen to this. And then she actually came and started talking to me about some of the topics. So that's kind of like what you said. People will listen. So if you just want to send it to your adoptive parents, like find a video, whether it's from us or from Isaac, a conversation that you think might spark interesting conversation. Maybe start off with lighter topics that aren't as, that won't be as conflicting, and then add on more heavier and heavier topics as you go. So that way, one, you're kind of letting your adoptive parents know, hey, I'm interested in this topic. Like, I'm interested in talking about this. Like, you're opening that door up for them, and it's up to them to take that invitation. And you might have to send it a few different times for them to actually, get the hint.
Yeah, I'm laughing at what Howell was saying about her mom watching the podcast. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's my dog. Let me support her. My parents, on the other hand, I have ruined the family.
Oh,
I
yeah.
cannot believe I'm talking about this. Like the whole world was just gone to hell.
Yeah,
So the reaction between the two, I just laugh about it because it's so funny. I'm just
it's
like,
so
oh my
different.
God.
Yeah.
But the great thing about people who are listening to our podcast
Yes.
and then sending it to somebody else, it's not coming from their own mouth. So it won't be as like a personal
that's so
attack to
true,
the parents.
Yeah.
Because you can be like, oh, look at Famata talking about how her parents didn't do this and do that. In a way, you're kind of hinting to your parents, like, okay, I experienced that, but it's not coming from your own mouth. So
and when they don't, because some of them do still have that little savior mindset. Oh, I didn't do that. Oh, I didn't do that.
Yeah.
Oh,
like, thank God your experience wasn't like this.
It must,
exactly.
your experience. So when they start to kind of gear towards that, it's like, no, that's when you start to actually talk about it verbally yourself, because some of them do kind of still have that mindset. Oh, I didn't do that. I was a good parent. I was a good adoptive parent.
Yes. That's why the right resource could make a difference. And I think that does give me a good idea. Somebody should make that. I'm not sure who I'm going to give that idea to. But yes, there should be some kind of facilitator. You know who would be great at creating this is you guys know Cam Small, Redeem Therapy.
I mean, we're kind of new to this space, so we don't know too many of the OGs of the you talking about like in the adoptive space, right?
Yeah, he's in the adoption space, but he's a big Instagrammer. That's why I thought maybe you guys would have crossed paths already. His Instagram is Redeem Therapy. He would be great at creating a resource like this. But you guys would like him. He's an Asian therapist, adoptee, cool guy, transracial adoptee, same experience, like similar experience as all of us. But great guy, great at building resources.
Nice.
But yeah, no, thanks for sharing. I mean, this is a great conversation, and I'm not sure what your time limit is here, but overall, I mean, I think what you guys are doing here is pretty powerful. And I like the style of it, to be honest. I think this is really what's missing from a lot of the space. And honestly, something I've been thinking a lot. Like I pull a lot of inspiration from you guys, from adoption journeys. And there was another one that I saw, like Adoptee Dad or something like that recently, where I think that like there's a lot of need in this space for a very conversational approach. This is a rough comparison, so don't take it on the nose. But like, if you think about like Barstool Sports content, you guys and like Adoption Journey and some of these other people are, to me, creating what is the equivalent of just like conversating, dialogue, community content that's not so necessarily like, here's the education that you're going to get today, but it's just so natural and such a conversation that I do really impactful what you guys are doing. So I'm really excited to be here and to like watch you guys continue to keep growing.
Well, thank you. You're honestly such an inspiration. I think for like what we like about your approach to it is, one, you have the more human, real aspect, but you also have the educational aspect as well. And I think that creates like a very trusting layer for adoptive the parents, because they need people that they can trust, that know what they're talking about, not just from lived experiences, but they've actually done some research. They know what it's like to be adopted beyond just their personal experience as well. So I think you come with it with so many different layers that's just very helpful for both the parents and also the adoptees, Fatmata was the one who actually found you, so we're so
I think
I would share you guys on my story for so long before you actually messaged me.
Oh, yeah, really? That's funny.
Yeah, I always found it so funny. I was like, I wonder if they know that. When you messaged me, I was wondering I wonder if they saw that I shared them on my story. Like,
I think that's what it was. And then you followed me on my personal page.
Yes.
Who is this? So I was digging, and then I went onto your YouTube channel. I was like, oh my gosh, it's another adoptee! Yay! We get so excited when we get connected with other adoptees, because it's like, it's just like having other adoptees that just understand you. Like, you don't even have to say certain things; you just understand.
You understand.
Yeah. So if you guys are watching this, please subscribe to Isaac's channel. It's so educational. He has a lot moving there. Our channel is more about having conversations, but he's actually putting things to work and actually providing resources. We will leave his information again in the YouTube description box. Follow him on all of his pages. He's amazing. We are so happy that you came on and to be part of this. So hopefully next time, you know, we would love to do this again, of course. The conversation.
Yeah, part 2. We got to have a part 2. We only did like a little bit of meat. We need more.
Yeah.
More.
Absolutely. Anytime, for real.
Okay, well, thank you guys for tuning in to another episode. Until next time. Bye.
Bye.
All right.
All right.